When I stood in the parking lot of the family court in Portland, divorce papers in hand, I thought to myself, so this is really the end. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known was this. This was actually the first time I was truly going to live. My name is Laura Jennings. I'm 52 years old, an accountant living in Portland, Oregon. I used to be the kind of person who believed stability was the ultimate form of happiness. A 25-year marriage, a 2-story house in the suburbs, an old but reliable Subaru, and a steadily growing retirement account. I wasn't rich, but I was safe. Or at least, I thought I was. Every morning, I'd get up at 6:30, brew a drip coffee, listen to NPR while packing my husband's lunch. His name was Mark, a structural engineer at a large construction firm downtown. We had 2 grown sons, both away at college out of state. When we were all still under one roof, life was simple but warm. I used to tell my best friend, I know marriage isn't always joyful, but I can live with that. You can't have everything. I didn't realize I was living under a quiet fear of change, fear of loneliness, fear of being left behind. Mark and I didn't fight much, but we didn't talk either. Our life together had become a kind of contract. I handled the meals, he handled the roof repairs. I knew he had changed, but I didn't want to believe that meant I had to change too. We had loved each other once, right? I always believed that as long as I kept trying, things would be okay. I wasn't prepared for the shock life dealt me one afternoon in April. That day, I found an email. Not a love letter. A financial plan. Mark had been preparing for life after divorce. He was planning to leave me without ever saying a word. Suddenly, everything I feared, loneliness, loss, an uncertain future, was right in front of me. And the thing I didn't expect? It set me free. I sat frozen in a kitchen chair, laptop still open, subject line bold and sharp on the screen. Post-divorce financial projections. He hadn't sent it to me. It was a draft, still in his outbox. I found it by accident, using his laptop to check for Costco coupon codes, something I did all the time, since I was still managing our household expenses. My hands were shaking. I didn't know what hurt more, his betrayal, or the fact that I wasn't even surprised. That night, I said nothing. We still had dinner together, grilled salmon and green beans. But the fish tasted saltier than usual. Not from seasoning, but from the tears I swallowed. A few weeks later, I finally confronted him. You're planning to leave me, aren't you? He said, Laura, we both know this isn't working anymore. We live like roommates. No anger. No apology. Just a blank statement, like he was signing over a lease. Mark moved out a month later. He got an apartment near his office. We agreed to keep things peaceful, no lawsuits, no disputes. But the silence between us felt like a cushion over a deep ache. I didn't even know how to cry. I called our older son, Max, and told him over the phone, Your dad and I are getting divorced. He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, Are you okay, Mom? That question snapped me out of my numbness. Was I okay? No. I was free-falling. I had lost my husband. I had lost a part of my identity. And I was about to lose the house because I couldn't afford the remaining half of the mortgage on my own. I remember sitting on a folding chair in the backyard, watching the orange-red sunset streak across the pine trees, thinking, I spent my whole life trying to preserve something that was never real. And the next question was, what was I going to do with the rest of my life? I still had time, but did I have the courage to start over? I remember that night in June so clearly, alone in a house once full of laughter. Streetlight shadows danced across the bedroom walls. I lay curled on the bed like a child, my back to the side where Mark used to sleep. His pillow still had the faint dip where his arm used to rest. I cried. Not the dramatic sobs you see in movies. Just quiet, broken gasps like breath catching in my chest. And then, from somewhere deep inside, a question came. If I've already lost everything, then what's left to be afraid of? It didn't give me answers, but it carved out space inside me. And in that space, I found freedom. Freedom from trying to please someone else. Freedom from awkward dinners. Freedom from the fear of being abandoned, because I was abandoned, and I was still here. A few weeks later, I sold the house. There was no other option. With my $58,000 a year accountant salary, I couldn't keep it. But for the first time in years, losing something didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like a beginning. I rented a small 2-bedroom apartment in Northeast Portland. Old hardwood floors. Tiny windows. But every morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen. I bought a green ceramic teapot, and each day, I brewed a cup and drank it in silence. No breakfast to make for anyone. No one to worry about pleasing. And then I started writing. Not much. Just journal entries, feelings, thoughts, things I had never told anyone. I wrote down the anger, the regrets, and eventually, tiny flickers of hope. I joined a divorce support group at the local community center. There, I didn't have to pretend. I wasn't someone's wife. I was just Laura learning how to live honestly. One of my new friends, Sandra, said to me after a meeting, "Laura, you think you've lost everything. But what you really did was take off a too-tight coat you've been wearing for 20 years. I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt lighter than the autumn air in Oregon. When the asset division agreement was finally signed, I walked out of the lawyer's office with exactly $18,000 in my personal account. The rest was in our retirement accounts, split down the middle. I got half, about $92,000 in an IRA, but I couldn't touch it without penalty until I turned 59 and a half. My apartment rent was $1,200 a month, not including utilities, car insurance, medical expenses, and a small credit card debt I had once planned to chip away at with my accounting salary. Looking back now, I understand why so many women fall into financial crisis after divorce. I wasn't poor, but I was walking a very thin line. I opened a new Excel spreadsheet, the first one that didn't have Mark's name under the payer column. I budgeted every dollar, canceled Netflix, downgraded my internet plan, switched from Whole Foods to Winco. I called the credit card company to negotiate my debt and enrolled in a lower interest rate program. All the things I used to advise others to do, I was now learning for myself from scratch. One night, while reviewing my statements, I let out a long sigh and thought, I'm 52, living alone, no support. And I'm terrified I won't be able to afford growing old. The anxiety crept in at night when everything was still. I'd wake at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat, panicking over health insurance bills, or imagining what would happen if I fell in my apartment and no one found me. But then, on a Saturday morning, I attended a free financial seminar for divorced women hosted by an independent advisor at the city library. The speaker was a woman in her 60s named Michelle, silver hair in a high ponytail, sharp eyes full of fire. She said, "Money isn't the biggest challenge after divorce. The challenge is believing you deserve to be in charge of your own finances." That line made me sit up straight. I had always let Mark handle the investments, the taxes, the major financial decisions. I just took care of the little things. But now, I couldn't afford to hand over my future to anyone else. A few weeks later, I opened a Roth IRA and started contributing $150 a month. I taught myself how to invest in index ETFs. I bought a book called Women and Money by Susie Orman and stayed up reading it late into the night. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just working to spend, I was working to protect my future. Freedom doesn't come from having a lot of money. It comes from knowing you control the money you have. September in Portland always carries a kind of gentleness, the crisp air, the maple leaves just starting to turn. I began each morning walking through Laurelhurst Park with a travel mug of coffee I'd bought from Target. No more rushed breakfasts cooked for two. This was my time now. During my walks, I'd listen to financial podcasts, Her Money, Afford Anything. These women talked about taking control of your finances, investing mindsets, rebuilding your life from zero. I didn't feel alone anymore. I began building a real plan. I installed the ANAB, You Need a Budget, app to track every dollar from my accounting job. I opened a high-yield savings account at Ally Bank and set up an automatic $100 deposit each month. I enrolled in an online course, Accounting for Freelancers on Coursera. It cost $49, but I saw it as an investment. I also started taking on small side projects, bookkeeping for a friend's nail salon, cleaning up the accounts for a local coffee shop. Not much, $300 to $500 per project, but to me, it was proof that I could earn income on my own terms. That little apartment slowly turned into my space. I hung Oregon landscape prints on the wall, bought a wooden table lamp that glowed warm and soft. I stopped seeing it as a temporary post-divorce shelter and started seeing it as the seed of a new life. One late night, while finishing a balance sheet for my first client, I glanced at the clock, 11:42 p.m. I was tired, but full of a quiet, steady confidence. I said to myself, Laura, you're not a victim. You're a beginner. I wasn't dreaming of being rich. I just wanted freedom. Freedom from dependence, from fear, from that hollow feeling of having nothing that belonged to me. And I knew every dollar saved, every smart choice, every time I said no to a meaningless expense was a step toward that freedom. One October afternoon, I ran into Mark at the Beaverton Farmers Market. He was with a woman, tall, blonde, early 40s. They stood side by side, picking out Honeycrisp apples. I froze, like someone had just turned up the volume on my memories. My chest tightened, not because I still loved Mark, but because of something harder to define, that strange ache of seeing someone who used to be yours now clearly, no longer yours. I turned away and walked fast. But that night, the feelings came crashing in like a tide. I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered, was I too plain? Too boring? Too forgettable for him to stay? That thought didn't come from logic, it came from wounds I couldn't see. And even though I had rebuilt my life, made plans, saved, worked hard, the past still knew exactly when to knock. I started doubting myself. When I sat down to invoice a client, a voice in my head whispered, who's going to hire a 50-something woman to be a freelance accountant? In meetings at work, when I spoke up, a younger coworker raised an eyebrow, like no one cared what the divorced woman had to say anymore. That doubt crept into everything. I smiled less, posted less on Facebook, started pulling back from friendships because I felt like I had nothing left to share. One day, while clearing out an old drawer, I found a birthday card Mark had once written me. It said, "You are the safest place I've ever known." I sank to the floor, tears falling, not because I wanted him back, but because I had to face a hard truth. Even the most beautiful things can fade. A few days later, I had a brief conversation with Sandra, a friend I'd met in the support group. I told her about my self-doubt, and she said just one thing. Laura, you don't need anyone else to validate your worth. Look at what you've done on your own. No one can take that away from you. For the first time, I nodded slowly. And I realized, backhand index pointing right, the shadow of the past only has power when we turn our backs on the light of the present. I started writing down the things I accomplished each week. Just little things. Finished client report on time. Went for a run 3 times. Didn't text Mark. Each note felt like a small victory. Every little step was proof that I was moving forward beyond who I used to be. My first winter living alone in Portland, I stopped turning the TV on just to have some noise. Instead, I lit a warm lamp, played soft jazz from a Spotify playlist called Evening Acoustic, and learned to see silence not as loneliness, but as peace. I began journaling each morning, just 5 minutes, answering 3 simple questions. 1. What am I grateful for today? 2. How will I take care of myself today? 3. What do I want to remember if today were my last day? At first, the answers were short. Grateful for a roof over my head. Drink more water. I don't want to forget that I survived. But slowly, those pages became a place to reconnect with myself, not the wife, not the employee, but Laura, a whole, independent woman, learning how to love herself. I started doing things I'd once put off because Mark didn't like them. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center near MT Tabor. I bought a new pair of hiking shoes and started solo hikes in Forest Park on weekends. I volunteered one Saturday a month at the Oregon Food Bank, packing food for those in need. No one told me to do these things. I did them because I wanted to, and that was the purest kind of freedom I had ever known. One Friday afternoon, after a successful team meeting, my boss, Erica, a young woman in her 30s, said to me, "Laura, I really admire how calm and clear you are in every situation." I smiled and replied sincerely, "Maybe it's because I've already been through the storm. And after the storm, you learn how to stand." In that moment, I realized the things I once saw as weaknesses, being older, divorced, financially unstable, were actually my strengths. I knew how to manage a budget, how to read people, and how to stay steady when others panicked. I no longer felt the need to prove I was good enough. I just lived according to the values I believed in. One evening, while journaling, I wrote this line: "I'm no longer afraid of losing everything, because I know now the things I truly need, strength, faith, peace, are already inside me." Funny enough, one of the things I feared most after the divorce wasn't about money, it was weekend evenings. Especially Saturday nights, that time once meant for two, dining out, watching movies, or just lying together on the couch. But then one day, at the watercolor class at the Southeast Portland Community Center, I met Angela, a Black woman in her 50s, a retired nurse, widowed for 3 years. We struck up a conversation because we both colored the maple tree's shadow wrong in our paintings. Angela laughed and gently patted my hand. "Who cares? Art's for healing, not for display." Her words felt like medicine for my heart. We started walking together every Sunday morning around the Selwood neighborhood. We talked about sleepless nights, old dreams, and new hopes. One time I asked her, "Do you ever feel lost?" Angela answered, "Sure. But you know what? People who've been broken are often the ones who understand healing best." Through her, I met a few other women in midlife from a group called Women Rewriting Life, a support circle that met every Wednesday night at the Multnomah Library. No one came there to complain. We came to share, to listen, and to remind each other we weren't alone. I started hosting small dinners at my apartment, my mom's lasagna recipe, salads with roasted apples, and a bottle of red wine. Slowly, laughter began to fill the space where I once cried in silence. One night, after the guests had left, I looked around my apartment, not fancy, no dining table for 6, no Mark, but it was full of genuine warmth. And I realized, backhand index pointing I, when you dare to open your heart, the world always has someone waiting to meet you. No one in our group was perfect. Some were raising kids alone. One had just lost her job. Another had recently lost her aging mother. But it was exactly that imperfection that held us together, because we understood each other where it mattered most, in pain and in courage. I used to think divorce meant isolation. But really, it gave me the chance to choose my relationships all over again, this time, not out of duty, not out of habit, but because my heart needed people who could truly listen and share. One spring morning, I stepped out of an office building on Southwest 2nd Avenue with a signed contract in hand, my name, and the signature of my very first major client for the independent accounting consulting business I'd started on my own. No longer an office employee. No longer waiting for a 2% raise each year. I had just officially become the owner of my own business, even if it was small, even if it was just a desk in a 2-bedroom apartment in Portland. There were no fireworks in that moment. No one took a video. But I knew, backhand index pointing right, I was no longer just a survivor of divorce. I was someone actively rewriting the next chapter of her life. I used to live to avoid risk, to not make anyone uncomfortable. But after the divorce, after the lonely nights and the group meetings with women also trying to heal, I came to a profound realization. I can choose and have the right to choose a way of living that aligns with my values. I chose to do the work I was good at, but in my own way, serving small clients like nail salons, corner stores, and freelancers, the kind of people big consulting firms usually ignore. I help them understand their financial statements, plan for taxes, and most importantly, I listened. I chose to spend money mindfully, no new car, no flashy dinners. But I invested in myself, a quality printer, licensed accounting software, and even a 3-day solo trip to Bend, Oregon, just to sit by Mirror Lake and read. I also started a blog chronicling my journey, sharing with other women over 50 who found themselves at a crossroads, not for fame, but to say, I used to be afraid of losing everything, but I didn't lose myself. One evening, after publishing my 20th post, I received an email from a stranger. I'm 54, recently divorced, living in a rented apartment. You gave me hope that it's possible to start over and that it can be beautiful. Thank you for daring to share. I cried, not from sadness, but because I realized that, in the end, I hadn't just escaped my past. I had become a small light for someone else. That's transformation. No longer living as someone left behind, but living as someone creating value, meaning, and love, right from the place that once held pain. I was having breakfast in the kitchen, sunny-side-up eggs, toast, and a cup of dark roast from the cafe down the street, when the phone rang. The screen read, OHSU Hospital. My heart dropped. My blood froze as the voice on the other end said, Is this Laura Spencer? We're calling from the ER. Your mother, Alice Spencer, was just admitted for a minor stroke. Within 15 minutes, I was at the hospital, no makeup, hair a mess, but with a look of fierce determination in my eyes. Seeing my mother lying still in that hospital bed, the old fear surged back, that helpless panic of losing everything I thought I had already overcome. My mother, the woman who had spent 30 years in the kitchen, who once told me a woman needs to know how to keep a family together, was now fragile, motionless, and entirely dependent on others. The doctor said she'll need time to recover. A nursing home or in-home care might be necessary for a while. It's your call. I'd only been running my freelance business for 6 months. My savings would last 3, maybe 4 months if I stopped working. I had no siblings. It all fell on me. That night, sitting alone in my apartment, I drew 2 columns on paper. If I pause work, Mom gets proper care, but I lose momentum. If I hire outside help, I keep working, but she might not get enough attention. I called Angela. She said, Laura, you don't have to choose perfect. You just need to choose what's most aligned with your capacity and your values right now. I took a deep breath. For the first time, I didn't act out of fear. I acted out of a grounded belief that I could figure this out, even if life never feels neatly tied. I hired a part-time nurse from care.com, someone experienced in post-stroke elder care. I reduced my work schedule to 4 days a week, prioritizing long-term clients. Every Sunday, I cooked lunch for my mom and read the newspaper with her like a ritual. Instead of panicking, I made a plan. Instead of collapsing, I adjusted. Backhand index pointing right, I was no longer a woman reacting from emotion. I had become a woman who could make decisions with boundaries, responsibility, and compassion. Divorce had taught me how to survive. But caring for my mother taught me how to grow up all over again, with patience and love. One September evening, while reorganizing my bookshelf, my hand brushed against an old notebook. Inside were scribbled notes from 2 years ago, right after the divorce. One line was underlined 3 times. Start a small office, not just for accounting, but to teach women financial independence. It wasn't just a dream. It was something I wanted with all my heart. Recently, I saw a listing for a small office space on the 2nd floor of a building downtown, natural light, close to the Burnside and Park Avenue intersection. I called. $1,200 a month, more than my budget, but manageable if I gave it everything I had. Then I remembered my mom. She still needed me. The nurse only worked part-time. Twice a week, I had to take her to physical therapy. One night after dinner, she looked at me quietly and asked, "Laura, are you tired? Am I holding you back?" I swallowed hard. "No, Mom. I'm okay." But inside, I wasn't. I started waking up at 3 a.m. not because of an alarm, but because my mind was being pulled in two directions. One side was my dream, the thing I believed could help other women avoid the pain I'd gone through. The other was my responsibility to care for the woman who had sacrificed everything for me, who had stayed up nursing me through fevers, who had sewn my prom dress by hand. This is the quintessential American dilemma, the emotional tug-of-war for those of us in midlife, caught between two generations. Our aging parents need care, while we're still rebuilding our futures. It's called the sandwich generation. And I'm the filling pressed tight between both sides. One evening, I sat down to talk with Angela, my best friend and part-time therapist. She asked me, "Laura, if your mom were clear-minded and healthy, what do you think she would want you to choose?" I knew the answer. She would want me to live, really live. My mom always dreamed of a stable life, but she also understood I'm from a different generation. I'm the kind of woman who dared to get divorced when love was gone. Who dared to live a life of truth. Backhand index pointing out I don't have to sacrifice my dreams just to prove I'm grateful. I can be grateful and still live in alignment with who I am. I decided to delay opening the office for 3 months, enough time to plan for hiring a second nurse, and to start fundraising through online classes on personal finance for middle-aged women. I wasn't giving up. I was simply choosing a more humane path, both for my mother and for myself. October mornings in Portland come with a fine drizzle, like always. I was preparing materials for my first online class when the phone rang. This time it was from the nurse's office. They told me Mary, the woman who cared for my mom in the mornings, had been in a car accident on her way over. She was okay, but she'd need to take a few weeks off. I stood frozen. Just a few hours later, the hospital called. My mom had slipped in the bathroom. Nothing serious, but she needed to be monitored. When I got there, she was sitting on the bed, her eyes glassy with tears. "I'm so sorry, Laura. I ruined everything for you." I wrapped my arms around her, my heart clenched tight. "No, Mom, you didn't ruin anything." But in my mind, the thoughts came crashing in like waves. My first online class is this afternoon. I haven't finished the slides. Who's going to care for Mom in the coming days? Will I lose clients if I cancel the course? Or am I just being selfish, chasing a dream at the wrong time? I stepped out into the hallway, leaned against the wall, and stared at Oregon's gray sky. I had two paths in front of me. One, cancel the class, accept the hit to my credibility, and delay the dream. Two, go ahead with the class, ask my trusted neighbor to watch Mom for a few hours, even if it meant feeling guilty the whole time. I called Angela not to ask for advice, but just to say the thoughts out loud. She listened, then said gently, "Laura, life doesn't offer us perfection. It just offers us the chance to be honest with ourselves." I stood there, exhaled slowly. Then I called Mrs. Edith, my 74-year-old neighbor who used to be a nurse. I asked if she could sit with my mom for a few hours that afternoon, just help her with a light meal and keep her company. She said yes right away, no hesitation. "Laura, you have to go. That's your dream, and your mother would be proud to know you didn't give it up." That afternoon, I opened Zoom. The camera turned on. On my screen were 23 women, from single moms in Idaho to a newly divorced woman in New Jersey, all of them searching for hope from someone like me. I began with a story. This morning, I was in the hospital with my mom. I almost canceled this class. But I knew if I didn't share what I've learned, then all the pain I went through would mean nothing. And I taught, with everything I had in my heart. Backhand index pointing out it wasn't a perfect class. But it was the most real, free, and fulfilled I'd felt since the divorce. I was no longer afraid of losing everything, because I'd come to understand, you can lose it all, but if you don't lose yourself, you still have everything. After that first class, I didn't become a sensation. I didn't go viral. No articles were written about me. But I got one email from a woman named Rebecca in Ohio. For the first time, I feel like someone understands what it's like to rebuild after everything falls apart. Thank you for not canceling the class. I read that line 5 times. Not because it was poetic, but because it was real. It was the first sign that I was headed in the right direction. I started rebuilding my life not through big leaps, but through small, steady steps. I added 2 more personal finance classes each month. Each one had about 15 to 20 participants, with a $30 fee. I launched a simple blog on Squarespace, sharing my post-divorce journey, honestly, with nothing held back. Not to complain, but to connect. I started journaling again, something I had stopped doing after I turned 30. Some pages were soaked in tears. Some were filled with questions I couldn't answer. But I wrote. Every night before bed. My mom slowly recovered. She started sharing more stories from her youth, like the 2 of us were reliving our younger years together. One evening, while I was arranging flowers in the kitchen, she said, "You know, I've never stood on a stage in my life. But watching you in front of that camera, I feel like I've lived part of that life through you." I didn't answer. I just bent down and kissed her hand. I also began to recover financially in the way only a middle-aged American woman who has walked through brokenness can. I reopened the IRA account I had frozen during the divorce. I started putting away 10% of every class and blog earning into an index fund. I bought back the old leather chair I once wanted when I was still a wife, but this time, I paid for it myself. And it sits in my own office, no permission needed. Most importantly, I relearned how to believe in myself, not as someone's wife or someone's daughter, but as me, Laura Dawson, 52, living in Portland, once divorced, once lost, now choosing to live authentically. I no longer feel the need to prove anything to the world. Backhand index pointing right, I just want to live a life that, when I look back on it, I can say, I didn't crumble, I chose to stand up again in my own way. I used to think success meant a 6-figure salary, a house in the suburbs of Lake Oswego, and a husband who always smiled in Christmas photos. I had all of that. And then I lost all of it. But on a quiet winter evening, as I brewed chamomile tea with my laptop open beside me, reading emails from students, my mother knitting peacefully in the living room under the soft yellow light, I realized. Backhand index pointing right, this is what real success looks like. Not because I'm wealthy, I'm still paying off old credit card debt. Not because I'm famous, my blog has fewer than 2,000 subscribers. But because I no longer fear being left behind, no longer feel invisible when I walk into a room, no longer question my own worth. Now I feel free. I choose the clients I want to work with. I teach what I believe in, not what's trendy. Self-reliant. I know every dollar I earn comes from effort and real experience. No one handed it to me, and no one can take it away. Self-respecting. I no longer ask for permission to be myself. One day, I was invited to speak at a small seminar in Seattle on rebuilding after divorce. In front of 60 women of all ages, I shared. I used to think I was the discarded half of something. But I've come to understand I was never a half. I've always been whole. I was just lost in someone else's dream for too long. The room fell silent. Then a woman, maybe around 65, stood up with teary eyes. Thank you. I've been divorced for 10 years and I think I've never really forgiven myself until now. After that, I got more invitations, book deals, podcasts, small group classes. But this time, I didn't rush. I chose to slow down. I chose to hold space for my mother, now more fragile, but still the heart of this home. I chose to keep my quiet mornings with coffee and the pale sunlight on the small back balcony. Because for me now, success isn't about racing to the finish line, it's about choosing my own path. One Sunday morning in early March, I got up early, made a French press coffee, and sat on the front porch, looking out at the oak trees still dusted with snow. No phone, no laptop, just the thin mist and the warmth of coffee in my hands. And I smiled. How long had it been since such a simple moment felt like enough? After the divorce, I used to fear I'd spend the rest of my life alone, like a shadow lost in the past. But slowly, I discovered what my marriage had once hidden from me. Backhand index pointing eyed joy doesn't come from having someone beside you. It comes from finally being with yourself. So I started to take myself on solo picnics in Forest Park, walking beneath towering pines, listening to old jazz through my headphones. Sign up for watercolor painting classes at the community center, something I'd loved in college, but gave up because I was too busy being a wife. Adopt a rescue dog named Milo, gray fur, eyes full of quiet wisdom. Every afternoon, we walk around Union Lake, where the spring sky reflects gently on the still water. For the first time in years, I no longer compare myself to other women, those who kept their families or remarried. I no longer feel less than. In fact, I feel more whole than I ever imagined possible. One day, while cleaning the house, I stumbled upon an old keepsake box. Inside was a card from a former student named Angie. Miss Laura, because of you, I started managing my own finances and enrolled in my first class since my divorce. Thank you for being a small light when everything around me felt dark. I sat down on the floor, holding that card to my chest. My eyes welled up, but not from sadness. From something deeper. I realized happiness isn't about being loved the most. It's about being a light for someone, even when you feel like you have nothing left to give. And maybe, in that moment, I finally stepped out of the shadow of the woman who was afraid to lose everything. Because now, I don't need to have everything to feel happy. I've found the light. Not from the outside, but from within. If you had asked me 3 years ago what I feared most, I would have answered without hesitation. Losing my family. Losing my husband. Losing my identity. I used to think that if my husband left me, I would simply vanish, like a shadow erased from the picture of life. But today, sitting in my little apartment in Portland, with Milo curled up in the sun beside me, I have a different answer. Backhand index pointing I did lose everything, but I found myself again. Divorce wasn't the end. It was a pause, a breath, the moment I finally began to listen to myself after years of being the wife, the nurturer, the one who gave everything. I once lost. A man who once promised to walk with me for life. A house I once believed was a home. A future I thought was already mapped out. But then I found a voice within me I had long forgotten, a strength I never imagined I had, a love for life, unconditional, unvalidated, and entirely mine. I came to realize some things fall away so we can truly see what remains and what we once dropped while trying too hard to hold on to someone else. These days, I'm no longer obsessed with getting back what I lost. I don't need another man to prove I'm still lovable. I don't need a perfect family to feel whole, because I've built a life simple, but truly mine. When you face the greatest fear of your life, you are never the same. You stop living to please others. You stop needing to be chosen, because now you choose yourself. When I was a wife, I thought my value came from being loved, being kept, being needed. I believed that if someone stopped choosing me, I'd be worth nothing. Divorce shattered that illusion. But in the shards, I finally saw my true reflection. An independent, resilient woman, still learning to love herself deeply and unconditionally. And I realized something every woman in America, whether on the busy streets of New York or in the quiet fields of Iowa, deserves to hear. Backhand index pointing you don't have to cling to a life that no longer fits you just because you're afraid to start over. A new life doesn't begin with getting things back. It begins when you're brave enough to let go. When you no longer fear loss, you start to see clearly who's truly walking beside you and who's just passing through. What's a real need and what's just a social script. Who you are when you're no longer performing for someone else's approval. I used to think starting over at 50 was a failure. Now I know. Backhand index pointing right. It was the gift I hadn't had the courage to give myself until I had no other choice. And the biggest lesson I can offer to anyone afraid of losing, whether it's your job, your marriage, your status, or your sense of stability, is this. You never truly lose everything if you still have yourself. And if you don't quite know who that self is yet, that's okay. Life has a way of leading you back to yourself, sometimes, after a goodbye. If you're sitting quietly in your familiar kitchen, staring out the same window you've looked through for years and wondering, what happens if he leaves me? If I'm no longer someone's wife, who am I? I want you to know. I've been there. I've cried into my pillow all night. I've Googled what to do when your husband leaves. I've sat behind the wheel with nowhere to go, just to avoid going back to an empty house. I know that feeling, like you're free-falling, unsure when or if you'll hit the ground. But here's the truth. Backhand index pointing right, hitting the ground isn't always the end. Sometimes, it's the place you push off from. I won't lie to you. This journey isn't easy. It will hurt. It will be long. It will ask you to let go of things you once believed were forever. But it will also teach you the most powerful lesson I've ever learned. You don't need to be chosen by someone else. You only need to choose yourself. Every single day. Even if it's just a little. Maybe today, all you can do is get out of bed, make a cup of tea, and open the window. That's enough. Tomorrow, you'll take another step. And then another. And one day, you'll look back and realize. Backhand index pointing at you didn't lose everything. You just shed an old shell, so you could finally meet the version of yourself that shines brighter than you ever thought possible. So, if you're afraid right now, know that fear is human. But don't let it keep you in a place you no longer belong. Take the step. I'm on the other side, and I promise you, the light is real. And it's already inside you.